Hello, this is Witches X. I'm here with a run of Astro Boy Omega Factor for the Game Boy Advance. This game is a little hidden gem for the console. It's not the most well-known game, but among people who know this game, it is pretty well loved. It's a fun beat 'em up. You got your attacks. So here we're going to look at some basic punching. There's also a laser beam attack, which we'll see in a second. Like a lot of games of this genre, you clear a screen, you move on to the next screen. So a lot of the movement in this game comes down to two factors. It comes to clearing out screens of enemies as quickly as possible, as well as clearing out screens of enemies as quickly as possible, as well as maneuvering between screens. So, you can see here that there's a lot of specific movement to being able to kill enemies quickly. And there's a lot of setup. Sometimes it's about maneuvering correctly, sometimes it's about setting up properly. So here we're going to see, you actually have three special attacks in this game, one of which we won't see in this run. But the other two are the shot I just did and the beam. And those are pretty useful. On this difficulty, you actually get pretty much as you'll ever need. But, they have startup animations, so they're not that good to use in all scenarios. Although clearing out the screen is a good use of them. You'll also see just there that I just upgraded. This is based on Astro Boy. If you're at all familiar with Astro Boy, you will probably know. And I'm saying this as someone who is not very familiar with Astro Boy. But you'll probably know that Astro Boy's Astro Boy's growth and power comes from his interactions with people. So when Astro Boy meets new people, he gets a little power up. You can, change your damage. First thing we do is we add a second jet, because jet is super useful for maneuverability, as you can see. But we'll never need more than two, so we're only going to upgrade that once. I'll talk more about upgrading once we get further into it. So this room is kind of interesting. This is the only room in the game where you don't actually need to clear out all the enemies. You just gotta get past them. Something that's a little unclear if you're playing casually. It seems like you gotta clear out this room, but you can just go right through it. Just like that. So this room is actually one of the tougher rooms in the entire game, to do fast, that is. Not casually, but, maneuvering between these fighters is a bit of a challenge to do quickly. It's very easy to make mistakes here. It's very easy. I think I do a couple times. I miss. But the idea is to be able to dash between them like I've done there, and, spend as little time having to jump back up off the ground as possible. So this is, pretty okay of that room. It's not perfect, but it was pretty good. This boss is pretty easy, so you just want to use three of those big super arm cannons. The boss does move, which sometimes you can get unlucky here, and the boss will move in a way that kind of, makes you move. It only costs a couple seconds, but, just time loss is time loss. So here we got our next upgrade. So we're going to be filling out laser, and this is for two reasons. In the late game, the laser is the most useful weapon, and even in the early game, it's still very useful. And there's also segments that we'll see soon that use it. So this boss has a very set pattern. Punch twice, big laser, and then when the boss gets down to this much health, you want to get off. So the reason I got off is the boss leaps at this much health, run out of the way, get a couple punches in, boss goes down. So you'll notice that I paused by mistake there. That's something that looks like a bad mistake, but it's actually quite easy to do because most cutscenes you have to mash through. So it's really easy to hit the start button one extra time. I don't do it super often, but it's easier to do than it seems. And it's not the biggest time loss. Anyway, these sections here are... These are the shmup sections. So first off, you'll notice that the only attack I have here is the laser. I still have my specials, which I'm not using right now, but my only attack for this is the laser. And with my laser at this level of upgrade, I actually have to mash that laser out. If I hold down the button, it doesn't do anything. So I'm mashing the button right now, which is not hard. You don't have to mash it super fast, but it's a little annoying. In later segments, I'll have the laser more upgraded and I won't have to do this. This also might look like an auto-scroller, and at certain points it is, but clearing out enemies faster, you know, moves you on to the next segment more quickly, so there is actually a lot of, you know, planning and execution here in order to get through these individual screens as quickly as possible. So these segments are a nice change of pace from the rest of the game. They definitely serve to keep things interesting. There's a total of 3 of them in the run. And, you know, also in the rest of the game. So, this boss is a little interesting. You've got to make sure... The challenge with this boss is to make sure that it... You know, you move in such a way that the boss, you know, kind of follows your pattern, which... so that you can be hitting it with, ideally, the big laser as much as possible, because this big laser weapon, in most parts of the game, is your best friend. The only reason you're not just using it constantly is because of that animation that Astro has when he uses it. You'll notice that every time you use it, you lose about 2 seconds to the animation of him pulling the laser out. This is an easy difficulty thing. You'll notice that I have 32 supers at the top. On harder difficulties, you actually get capped at 5, so you can't use quite as many lasers. So that's a thing. You have to be careful to make sure to actually walk into cutscenes at the right place, or you'll have to wait for Astro Boy to correct himself. So this boss is a very specific thing. You punch the wheel 4 times and then shoot with the laser. I actually kind of messed up the timing a bit here, but I did a bit of a recovery strat where I just hit with 2 lasers. Cost a few seconds, but not that big of a deal. So putting a second point into laser, as I will put into until laser is maxed out. I'm actually going to get 2 points down here. You'll notice this room is pitch black. This room would light up if I ever upgraded Sensor, but I'm never going to upgrade Sensor. There's also an optional boss off to the right that, you know, if you're playing casually, you can go fight, and beating the boss will, you know, cause Astro Boy to meet the boss and give him an extra power-up. So that, you know, if you didn't have Sensor while walking in, you can get it, because that would be a little unfair of the game not to give you that. But I know the way through this room. So, Mustache Guy over here asked me to blow up that thing. That's the fastest way to do it, is with the laser. Especially because if I try to punch it out, one of the bats will catch up to me and hit me 100% of the time. And that's something to be avoided. So, these enemies here die in exactly 1 big laser and 1 punch, or 1 laser. So, positioning here is key. There's very few spots you can stand, and it's a little hard to tell. So I actually made a small mistake there and was slightly off where I was supposed to be. So I got hit. It doesn't lose a ton of time, but there's this. So, there's a character hidden here. There's a few characters like this. They're hidden in the environment. They're completely invisible. And you have to hit them. So, I was in danger of missing it. You'll see on the right side of the screen that there was a damage spark over there. That's because that's where that character was hiding. I did the first shot a little early because I wasn't going to be able to punch it with the way the screen was, so I had to use a shot, but I shot very slightly early and ended up having to do 2 shots, which isn't that big of a deal. An extra shot is you know, it also hits the enemies for damage. Shot is mostly used for stun rather than damage, but in some cases you do that. So, stood over there, moved that thing right. Big laser takes those both out, and we're up to this stage's boss. Now, this stage's boss isn't the hardest, isn't the most difficult boss in the run, but you have to be a little careful here. So this boss changes forms, and 1 laser is enough to take out each form, but 2 of the forms, namely the shark and the lion, have different timings. The shark, if you don't fire it immediately, will dive into the water and you'll have to wait for it to pop back up. This one has a, invincibility aura that you can see, and you have to wait for it to go down. And you have to move away from the boss before, because the boss will just hit you out of your laser, so... The bird form, you have to be sure to jump up or you will miss it. The monkey form, you just stand in place, so... You have to be able to react quickly enough to these forms. Because the timing is different on all four. So this stage is, our classic moon stage, where the gravity's lower. Every game's got one. Makes things a lot more challenging, actually, because of the, because it makes, precise movement a lot harder when the game gets floatier. So my method for dealing with this room is to use 2 shots. From what I've found, it seems to be the fastest way, and it's definitely more safe. So 2 shots. This corridor is interesting. You have to kill all the enemies here, and they're all floating in a vacuum, so it's a matter of hitting as many as possible. This room is one of the harder ones in the run. In fact, this whole sequence that's coming up after this, too, is one of the harder. I actually do a pretty decent job here of, hitting as many enemies as possible, as much as possible. And the other key to do this fast is to make sure you're using your jets right. So I was able to use my jets to get up there fast enough, so I didn't have to go all the way down and all the way back up. So now we have these rooms. These rooms are all about positioning. You have to get your positioning right. There's a little RNG later on, which I'll explain when we get to it. But for right now, it's all a matter of positioning. So I want to be able to hit, because of the, I want to be able to hit these all with one attack, because that's the fastest way to do things. And I definitely don't want to be landing in between enemies, which is something that's very easy to do by mistake here. Yeah, I did it once over there, but not in the worst possible place. I take a hit there because of that mistake, but it's okay. So ideally you would hit those going up, but the timing on going up is a little tricky. It's very easy to miss accidentally, especially because you only really get one chance at it, which is fine. So I actually go... So that's one of the other ones that's hard to land on the left. I actually moved out of the way fast enough where it didn't matter, but it would have been slightly faster to have actually landed on the left. So I go down there when this one's emerging, and then mostly because I want to start up here and also start up there. So here I sneak behind these. I got lucky here, good RNG. This one can, move randomly. So sometimes you have to go chase after it, but it came up to me, so that was fine. This boss looks really cool and tough, right? 1 laser, 2 laser, 3 laser, and it's dead. Don't even have to move. There's also that mini one that comes out if you, if you don't kill the boss in 3 seconds. So, this room's, one of the more annoying ones, for reasons that'll become apparent right about now. So, the game kind of, for some reason, this encounter right here causes the game to just grind to a halt. I don't know what it is about it, but this room, this one little fight, has so much slowdown. The idea here is to lure the bats out, to hit them both at once. Making mistakes here, it can be incredibly costly, and between the floatiness of the low gravity controls and the slowdown, it's incredibly punishing if you mess it up, and if you make a mistake there. In this run, I managed to do that without a mistake, which is, pretty good. This room also gets a little bit of slowdown, but it's not nearly as bad as the other one, so just gotta go through it, nice and easy. Kill bats, make sure not to get hit by the crushers, and it's done. So here I do a shot to get all of these little ones to the top of the screen. That way they all go to they all rise to the top, and I can easily take them out with one punch. Otherwise, when I started to hit them, they would all scatter all over the place, and I'd have to chase after them. So, unfortunately, with the way the movement happened just there, I got the way where that green one escaped, so I lost a few seconds to that, but this room, you have to be careful not to accidentally dash, because if you get behind them, they'll fly all over the place, and you really don't want that to happen. These last two groups are tougher, and, don't get stunned by your basic attack. That was a mistake right there, making that jump. I lost a couple seconds to having to come back down. So here we have Atlas. Astro Boys are tribal, I assume. So Atlas, you need to time these. You gotta make sure to not get hit, basically. 4 lasers will do it. And Atlas will, if done correctly, Atlas will always die right there. So here we have... So cutscene skips dialogue, so that's why it's so easy to, do that, and why you still have to watch some of the video cutscenes. Anyway, now we max out laser, which is good, because very shortly there's another one of those shmup segments coming up. And we don't want to do that, so... I over-dashed there, which is something that's easy to do. It's not a big deal when it happens. You lose a couple seconds. So here the enemies are starting to get a bit tougher, so the arm cannon gets a lot more use from this point forward, because it starts getting slower at this point to fight enemies in other methods. That's not universally true, but it is largely true. There aren't that many more overworld non-boss segments, though, so it doesn't end up being that big of a deal. So this segment, you're supposed to go into the middle and, change direction left and right, which is Astro Boy will do automatically. On the left side of the screen, he'll fire right. On the right, he'll fire left. Except for it is faster to stay on the right side of the screen, because this will keep Astro Boy. Oh look, it's the real Dead Cross. We'll definitely kill Dead Cross right here. Oh no, it was a fake. We have to go back. So, this is one of those actual auto-scrollery parts that are not super common. There's a couple of them. This is one of them. This isn't, It doesn't last that long. We're already back to more enemies. So the best way to take care of these quickly is to use shots here. These things die in one shot if done correctly. Otherwise you gotta go around and it takes a lot longer. So depending on how many they are, it takes, 1 to 3 shots, and also depending on how good your timing is. That one, unless your timing's really bad, always takes 2. You can't do it in one because the cycles of things line up. They're only vulnerable when they don't have spikes. And they'll never all not have spikes at once. So you do have to use a minimum of 2 shots. If you do your timing really poorly, it can cost 3. So here's some bouncing red ones. Just gotta dodge them. Don't even really have to dodge them, it wouldn't matter that much. But this only lasts a few seconds, and then we're back to more of these, more shots. That one only had 2, and the 2 roam around in a circle with the same pattern. They roam around in sets of 2, so guaranteed to be one shot. So here's the thing I find a little funny. So as you've no doubt noticed by this point, those robots scale in size, which makes sense for robots, but there's some really tiny people and some really huge people. Anyway, this boss is all about getting the positioning correctly to do as fast as possible. You can get 2 behind, do 1 in front, and then you can... So that was a small mistake there. But it didn't end up mattering that much. I ended up losing the amount of time that it would have cost me to, basically I lost the amount of time that is the animation length. So I got some bad patterns with those. They didn't let me dash behind them easily. Just, you know, I gotta get them all at once. Which cost me a little bit. It's just some unfortunate timing. Same thing happened there, and I ended up taking a hit as a result, but it wound up being okay. So this screen is a bit trickier. You have to be very adaptive with what you do here, because, you know, the timing of their spawning, how they spawn, you know, what order you end up killing them in based on your big shots, you know, completely changes exactly what strategy you're going to take there, so it's a little bit of timing involved, or strategy involved. That room, not so much. Same with this room. So you need to make sure to land in front of that red one so the punches will go forward. Because if you don't let the punches go forward, you'll get punched, and if you get punched out of that, you lose time. Both you have to set up another one of those, and that... So from this point on, I'm going to be upgrading shot, and there's a very specific reason why I'm going to be upgrading shot from this point forward. And I'll explain that towards the end of the game, when it becomes relevant. So, here we have our last shmup segment. We're going to go fight Dead Cross for real this time. But first we gotta do this part. This is where the shmup segments get a bit more challenging. So, you'll notice that a lot of these enemies would crawl off screen eventually by themselves, but that would be very slow if I let them do that. So, there's a couple parts with these sections of 3 that fire backwards. The idea is to go behind the top one, quickly dash behind that one, then quickly dash behind the bottom one, then walk to the top one. But yeah, clearing the screen of enemies as quickly as possible here. Once again, Astro Boy's positioning is going to mean a lot, so you know, strategy here has to be a lot more adaptive than in the other two. There's also a matter of health. There's going to be another segment, and it's actually very easy to die in the next segment if you lose too much health. There is a health pickup, which I think in this run I actually do end up picking up, that does restore you to full health if you touch it. But it takes, you know, it's hidden, and you gotta walk to it, and you lose a little bit of time. You lose a little bit of time if it does. So I could have cut out a shot there, but it wouldn't have actually been faster, because I would have had to wait longer to do my first shot, which would have more than canceled out with waiting to do the first shot, so... I don't know what happened here. Usually those things tend to explode earlier. I'm not sure what caused them to not do it this time. Because they will explode on their own eventually. So here we have this stage's mini-boss. So first there's these two green and one pink segment that you have to take out. And then the thing will open its mouth and there'll be a cannon you have to take out. Now this cannon is very RNG dependent. There's 2 attacks it can do. One fires these little laser beams and the other fires a barrage of dots. You want the barrage of dots because the laser beam attack does not last very long and the thing will close its mouth. Unfortunately here, I got the worst possible luck and got 3 laser beam attacks, which wasted a bit of time. So this part's a little tricky. This is the only fight you have to fight on top of the train, but you constantly get blown backwards. So my strategy for this is to go take out the one at the front and then let the wind blow you backwards to take out the 2. I'm low on health, so I'm going to pick up that health power-up. It doesn't waste a ton of time to get that. So it's usually worth doing unless you're really high on health or grinding for world record. So the idea here is to go behind them and laser beam as per usual, but it's quite challenging here because you can't actually see what's behind you. And that ends up getting you punched in the back a lot. Especially because enemies spawn behind you. And if your timing's bad, they'll hit you, so... You have to be careful to actually dash behind all of them, and without being able to see if you're correctly doing that or not. That can happen. All in all, though, that segment wasn't super bad in this run. You know, got hit once. So here's the thing. So now we fight Dead Cross for real, and the thing is, Dead Cross has a robot. A lot of the time we end up not killing the robot just because it isn't actually important to killing Dead Cross if the robot dies. A lot of the time it winds up just being in the way, though. It winds up dying anyway. So this time the robot died, but it doesn't always. Lost a bit of time here due to that, you know, versus my splits, due to that really bad RNG on the front of the train. So this is our last full level, and then we get a boss, then we get like a boss rush of, you know, new bosses, but the last level is fighting 5 bosses in a row. So this is our last stage. And this one is, as would be expected, the most challenging of the stages. So there's these little enemies with shields now, so I jump up to hit those before they spawn. Unfortunately, I was a little too far to the right, and had to deal with a couple on the ground. Or, I was a little too far from the left, rather. At this point in the game, most enemy sets are best to laser. They just have a lot of health at this point, so it's faster to laser them in most cases. Not all cases, but most cases for these next. This level only has 2 screens of enemies, so... usually just using a big laser is the correct thing to do. Not so much when, you know, some of them don't get hit. If they're off-screen when the laser happens, they don't take damage. If they're but, you know, if they wander on the off-screen, they take some damage, which is why I didn't just shoot another laser. So here's a bunch of tiny enemies. One of them got past me, which is not the best. These ones can be quite annoying just because there's so many of them and they all have their shields. So if something like that happens, you can lose a little bit of time. This room's a little big and it's a little annoying because of how big it is. Just because, you know, it's super easy for them to wander off and then you don't get them all in one laser shot. I got lucky and that didn't happen though. See, these ones are gigantic, which makes them very easy to kill, because you can just do that. So this room is probably the hardest in the entire run. You need to get past these things, and of course you're invincible while you're dashing. But if you mess up your dash timing here, you get hit, and it's actually quite easy to die, especially after that last room. So I got hit a couple times, which cost me some time. I'll give a little spoiler here, I'm not about to die. I do go down to 1 health though, which is going to provide an interesting boss fight. So here's the deal with this boss. You don't want to damage this boss too quickly. This boss has an attack and a fight. So this boss has 3 summon attacks where he'll summon, you know, 3 different helping gods, depending on how much health he has left. But he can't summon another god while one's already summoned. So the idea here is to make absolutely certain that you get one of the 2 early gods summoned before bringing him on low health, because the last god he summons is an attack that you have to dodge a bunch of rocks during, and the problem with that is that you know, it's not hard to dodge, but it wastes a bunch of time, so you want that to be avoided. Anyway, now we fight 5 bosses in a row. So this boss, you basically are supposed to run around it for the first phase and trick it into putting its fist up and then go punch it on the other side. But there's a little exploit you can do there where you do exactly what I just did. And while jumping up, jump, get the hand out, and then use one of these lasers, which the boss would normally punish you for, by dealing half your health and damage undodgeable. But that can be avoided with that little trick. And, you know, the second phase is quite simple. You just punch a couple times to make sure it's not going to block, and then shoot a big laser. So this boss, you're going to start seeing an exploit here now. So this boss is supposed to, you get to hit this boss a couple times, and then they go run around, they turn invisible, you have to hit these generators to turn them off. But our guns actually stun enemies, and we can use this to keep this enemy in place, preventing them from disappearing off. So, doing a couple little attacks there. Boss didn't get to despawn. We got it all in one shot, and that's going to be a theme for these upcoming bosses. So here we have a big chicken. So this chicken has 3 attacks. This is the worst one you can get. The other 2 open up vulnerability afterwards. That one doesn't. This one's fine. The other one shoots beams, and that one also leaves it vulnerable. So the idea is that the boss does attacks, and you have to wait for the boss to do more. So, but by, once again, alternating shot and arm cannon, we can keep the boss frozen in place and just kill the boss like this. Now, it's important that you don't try to skip one of the shots, because if you do, the boss will unfreeze and do more attacks. But you do have enough at one point to do 2 in a row, which is what's going to happen at the end here. I'm going to do 2 in a row real quick, because there was enough left time in the animation for that to happen. So that's our boss number 3 down. So here's our next boss, coming up right here. This boss is underwater, the jump controls get floaty again. This boss has a number of attacks, only one of which is really a problem. So once again, we're going to stun in place. We're not going to be so absolute with the stun in place, because this boss, has more is vulnerable throughout more of their animations, so we can do this. Now this boss used the laser attack, which is the last thing you want, but it can be countered by using gun and freezing in place, but now we have to make sure that they don't do more of those, because if they did more of those, it would have this big attack that would hit a bunch of places in the screen we'd have to wait through, which means that I do have to keep the gun I do have to make sure to restun every time, which loses a bit of time. Anyway, all these stun loops are why I upgraded shot so much. And also, once you have laser maxed out, it's not really that big of a deal what you put points into. So, the idea with this boss is very much the same. You want to hope for attacks that don't do things. You want to try to get in multiple lasers. But the thing is, I actually got very bad RNG here. This tornado attack is kind of the only one where you can't really do anything about. Everything else you can do this. Especially there's 2 attacks the boss does, one with a big fire blast, one with a big lightning blast. Those 2 attacks give you plenty of time to fire a bunch of beams. So I got a fire attack eventually. I got a few tornadoes beforehand, which isn't ideal. But I get to do a few of these. So what the fire one does, which you're about to see, is it just causes explosions. Those explosions do a lot of damage if you stand in them, but they're really easy to dodge. So, first the boss here, going to try to get 2 off. It doesn't quite kill the boss, unfortunately. I was expecting it to. So I lose a bit of time at the end here, just to the boss, having a small miscalculation, but there we go. Pluto's down. That's the end of the run. If you're watching this video, thank you so much for watching this video. What the game actually does next is you're supposed to replay the entire game now. Play each level again, and then you can go through and do some extra stuff to play more, but this is where things stop for here. So, thanks again if you've watched this video. I hope you enjoyed this game. I will see you all later.